Chapter 32. I've just underlined little Aztec hearts. This is cooking. Rita and Cora cooking. It's Rita in particular here, and she's talking about the radishes and how she's cut the tops off of them, and then she describes them as little Aztec hearts. Think about the connotations of Aztec hearts, human sacrifice and that kind of thing. And that's not to say that Rita herself is the villain of the piece, sacrificing humans here, but just to sort of foreground that general image of murder and sacrifice and weird religion as well. So it's just a way of emphasizing it without necessarily making Rita herself a villain. She asks Rita for a match because she's been told to ask her for a match for the cigarette that Serena Joy has just given her. So she also gives her an ice cube. She turns away from me and sits again at the table. Then she picks up an ice cube out of the bowl and pops it into her mouth. This is an unusual thing for her to do. I've never seen her nibble while working. You can have one of them too, she says. A shame making you wear all them pillowcases on your head in this weather. So there's a bit, I've written a female thing, there's a bit of a female camaraderie. It's also a little bit subversive of Rita. To say pillowcases, it diminishes the uniform of the handmaid. It's something that people often say about nuns; they wear pillowcases. So it's a way of perhaps being a little bit subversive, a little bit naughty. I go along the passage up the stairs, hurrying. In the curved hallway mirror, I flit past a red shape at the edge of my own field of vision, a wraith of red smoke. I have smoke on my mind, all right. Already I can feel it in my mouth, drawn down into the lungs, filling me in a long, rich, dirty cinnamon sigh. And then the rush of the nicotine hits the bloodstream. I like that description. So the next page, nothing much to say. An escape quick and narrow. I lie in my bed pretending to nap. So the idea of her escape being in her own mind. And she's thinking about the commander last night. Now we have here just a few things that I've underlined. He's talking about the Cubans. Damn Cubans, he says. All that filth about universal daycare. So that is socialism, of course, to have free daycare, free childcare, basically for children. Sometimes after the games, he sits on the floor beside my chair, holding my hand. His head is a little below mine, so that when he looks up at me, it's like at a juvenile angle. It must amuse him, this fake subservience. So this is how women and men often relate to each other. The men often place themselves below women. You might have heard of the phrase of placing a woman on a pedestal, but men often, debase themselves, lower themselves in order to appeal to women. It's a convention of courtly love. And the commander is arranging it so that he is lower than her. But of course, that subservience, that lowering himself, it's fake. It's not real. And then we've looked at these quotes together. The problem wasn't only with women, he says. The main problem was with the men. There was nothing for them anymore. Nothing, I said, but there was nothing for them to do, he says. They could make money, I say, a little nastily. Right now, I'm not afraid of him. It's hard to be afraid of a man who's sitting watching you put on hand lotion. This lack of fear is dangerous. So we talked about the sort of voyeuristic nature of his watching her putting on hand lotion. It's not enough, he says. It's too abstract. I mean, there was nothing for them to do with women. What do you mean, I say? What about all the porny corners? It was all over the place. They even have it motorised. I'm not talking about sex, he says. Now, we've talked about this, but the key point I'd sort of like to make here is we can recognise this in our own society. This book's from the 80s. We're not from the 80s, but we know about things like Tinder, the idea that sex has become very available in modern society, and that is somewhat problematic. Now, so this is effectively, it's a bit like a Bond villain saying why they're doing what they're doing to James Bond near the end of the movie. It's a film. It's a trait that we see in lots of different films. We often find villains in films are actually right in some way. And actually, interestingly, and you can look into this if you're interested, but there is an argument that this is more and more the case. In the 1960s movies, villains were straightforwardly bad. They were villains because they were bad. Whereas in a lot of modern films, villains are basically right, but they're doing things in a bad way. What springs to mind for me is the television program Utopia, which is on Channel 4, which is very, very shockingly violent. But the villains in that were really trying to save humanity, but they were trying to save humanity in the wrong way. And they were motivated by things like climate change. And we often find that in modern films, that the villains are right. They're killing a lot of people, but for the right reasons. And you've got an element of this with this commander, that he's talking about something that we perhaps agree with. He's talking about something that is, for liberal feminists like Margaret Atwood, a difficult issue. So we've talked about that in lessons. How do liberal feminists feel about things like this? Do liberal feminists say that, well, as women, you can do whatever you want? Or do they say that entrenches the patriarchy and we should ban it? We then have this conversation between the commander and Offred, and it's quite a powerful one. I don't think a lot, I say lightly. What he wants is intimacy, but I can't give him that. There's hardly any point in my thinking, is there, I say. What I think doesn't matter. So I'm reminded rather of the monster at this point because of the isolation that she's suffering. And then we get to that quote of, "You can't make an omelette without breaking eggs," is what he says. "We thought we could do better." Better, I say in a small voice. How can you think this is better? Better never means better for everyone, he says. It always means worse for some. So that is a real point about dystopia. That's a real dystopian fiction trope. That word there says revolution. So he is the revolutionary, changing society, trying to make it better. And I think we would agree, failing. And then we have this idea of female networks. The electricity might go off. I could go down to the kitchen, then say I'm afraid. Sit with Rita and Cora around the kitchen table. They would permit my fear, because it's the one they share. They'd let me in. There would be candles burning. We would watch each other's faces come and go in the flickering, in the white flashes of jagged light from outside the windows. "Oh Lord," Cora would say. "Oh Lord, save us." The air would be clear after that, and lighter. Again, we're reminded of the monster being afraid and alone, and totally alone. I look up at the ceiling, the round circle of plaster flowers. Draw a circle, step into it, it will protect you. So that's a pagan idea, isn't it? The protective circle. And note the white plaster flowers, that fake life. If we think about flowers symbolizing fertility and all that kind of thing, if they're made of plaster, they're fake, they're dry, they aren't real, which is, of course, the problem with the fertility in this household. And then I've underlined there that particular line, "I feel buried." It's the idea that poor Offred is dead in life. There is very little for her to live for.